I'm here with Colonel Macgregor, and I wanted to ask you a question, something that a lot of folks in my audience are in, millennial Gen Z, there's younger people. Most of my audience is in their 20s and 30s. So, of course, video games and movies are very popular. Call of Duty, one of the biggest franchises in the entertainment, period, even grossing more revenue than a lot of movie franchises now. So, you're someone who's a veteran, you've seen active combat. And I think it's important to kind of go there right now because I think a lot of times when you look at, especially social media in this recent conflict in Ukraine, where people would just scroll through, they see a cat video and then they scroll through and they see someone getting bombed or in the middle of a field in Ukraine, a Russian or a Ukrainian or a drone or something. And it's like almost desensitizing people at a pace that's pretty horrific. So when you think about that, the social media casualness, the video games where you always get more lives after you get shot. I mean, that's not the reality of war, is it? Is it a game when you look at it?
No, real war is by no means a game. There's no question about that. And for everybody who goes into action and sees combat, they have a different experience. And I'll talk about mine very briefly, but first I'll share an incident with an officer who served under me as a lieutenant, then subsequently was in Iraq as a major. And he was a battalion S3. And they had launched some sort of air mobile insertion with the goal of capturing Islamist fighters somewhere. And it had gone rather well. And the battalion commander turned to his S3 and said, come on, Dave, let's go up there. I want to be part of this. And he said, yes, sir. And so he said, come on, follow me. Well, he was standing there with a radio and some other gear with another soldier and said they had to get it together. He ran straight towards the objective and like 3 seconds later stepped on a mine and blew both of his legs off. Now, you stop and think about that. Someone goes there, he lived and probably would not have lived in previous wars because nothing could have been done for him that quickly. But we were able to save his life, thank God. But on the other hand, he suddenly lost his legs. With the loss of his legs went everything else that was important to him, obviously. And he did his duty, and he's not somebody who cries over this or anything else, but that's a very stark experience. And that young man who was a major, who then subsequently retired later on as a full colonel, had never left him. He remembered that for the rest of his life. And what that does to you is you say, wait a minute, if we're going to do this, then let's make damn sure we know what we're doing, that we have control of ourselves as well as everybody else, that they're adequately equipped and trained, that we've looked at all the possibilities, we've taken all the precautions, and we've done the best we can, then we launch. And his point at the time was they really didn't know or expect to find any mines there. Now that happens in combat. You never know everything about everything, no matter what they tell you above you. And there's an old Army expression, intelligence is always wrong. The Germans frequently said the same thing. Of course, they didn't know we had Ultra, and so we knew where they were coming. Didn't make much difference in most cases. The Germans were still successful despite what we knew. But the point I'm trying to make is that's one kind of warfare. I was in a different kind of warfare. And it was the marriage in a very close and intimate way between men on armored fighting vehicles with tank guns, 120 millimeter smoothbore cannons, and 50 caliber machine guns, and 7.62 caliber machine guns, and 20 millimeter automatic cannon and machine guns. With lots of machine guns. And you drill, you practice, because warfare for someone in an armored force like that that's moving across the desert or anywhere is a gunfight. It's literally, you pull pistols and shoot first, you're probably going to live. But if you're watching and you're not sure and you're hesitant, you may die. And that's another reason why they talk about situational awareness and they want to build screens and tell everybody where they are. Well, that's helpful. But there's nothing better than the human knowledge that comes with formations and drills. So if you've practiced to move in a certain formation, then you know who is on your right and who is on your left and who is behind you. It's a mental picture that is built up over time through habit. That's why you form formations and hold them together. Everybody becomes accustomed to everybody else. You know your strengths and weaknesses. I mean, I had one troop that could shoot the eyes out of a snake at 5,000 meters. And nobody could do better, but they weren't as good at maneuver.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, another troop that maneuvered brilliantly, they weren't as good at gunnery. I mean, they were certainly good, as it turned out. But you find these things, and you know the differences in commanders and their personalities, because whoever leads has profound influence on the people that he is leading.
Yeah.
And if the commander is a rough and ready, tough, aggressive character, that rubs off on the soldiers. If the commander is more circumspect, deliberate, and cautious, that rubs off. That's not bad.
Yeah.
Because they both have their place.
Yeah.
And at some points in time, one is better than the other.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean one is always better than the other.
Right.
So that plays into it. But in armor, where I was, you end up becoming very close with the 4 people that are on that tank with you, or within the 5, 6, or 7 that may be with you inside a Bradley armored fighting vehicle. And when you fight, you learn more about everybody, because I remember the one thing I've seen that came closest to the reality, not in terms of showing blood and gore and all that business, because that's all there. We all know that. It's a film called In Harm's Way.
Okay.
And towards the end of the film, they go into a surface battle at sea. And the reserve officer asks his friend, who is a rear admiral, what's a surface battle like? And John Wayne kind of sighs, and he got this from somebody who'd been in action. It was put in the film for that reason. And he kind of looked back and he said, well, it's really a lot of men aboard ships behind guns who are all scared and frightened, ready to fight and kill a lot of other men behind guns and in ships who are also scared and frightened. Well, then how does this ever happen? It's because even though you may be afraid, what separates the good professional soldier from the weakling, the coward, or somebody who just doesn't know better and runs, is this ability to suppress your fear. And that's not easy. Mm-hmm. It's best if you have several days of exposure and get confidence in yourself and what you're doing, then you fight infinitely better. Not everybody has that opportunity. That put the Germans in North Africa and Italy way ahead of us, because they'd been in combat many, many times. They had experience. It took us time to get the experience so that you understand that not every round that is shot at you is meant for you. Then just because you go out there to fight doesn't mean you're doomed to die. Mm-hmm. Somebody's going to die. Somebody always dies, and some number of people die. Doesn't mean everybody dies. Yeah. So you learn to suppress these kinds of things. And for me, it was really driven home just how horrific and final death on the battlefield can be when we lost a Bradley. This was struck by a 30 millimeter round from a BMP gun. And it was kind of a freak because it didn't strike the armored chassis. It struck a missile that was in the launcher above the vehicle. And it just so happened that the hatch below where the driver was about this far open. When normally when you fire, it's always closed. Okay. And in combat. But they'd been at it for several hours and they were tired and they needed some fresh air. And there was nothing happening. So he opened the hatch. And at the point in time when you thought nothing was happening and it was safe, boom, this round hits the tow missile. The blast goes down into the vehicle. And there were a total of 5 people involved. 1 was killed, 3 were wounded, 1 made it out with light wounds. There were 6 wounded that day badly, but not horrifically. And you had to see what was left. And there was nothing, because the vehicle then caught fire. And it had a high aluminum content in the metal. So the turret actually burned down into the vehicle. So when you looked at it, the top of the vehicle no longer had a turret, it was flat. And that later on caused problems because at night we weren't even sure whose vehicle that was. But that man ended up, his remains were placed in a plastic bag about this size. Yeah. And that's all that went back. And I met his parents, his father and stepmother. I felt terrible. And his father happened to be a Lutheran minister. And I said, I'm so sorry, because we did everything we could. We trained everybody. I didn't think something like this would happen. And he said, look, He was very proud to be there. He wanted to be there. And indeed, I subsequently got letters, one of which I put in a book. The last one that he wrote, talking to his family, that he was glad he was there with his friends. And that's very important. You're with people that are not just next door, they're your friends. And he was confident, and he was proud, and he loved his family, and he signed the letter. And I put it in the book, Warrior's Rage, which came out many years ago, because it was so moving to me. He was, in many respects, the archetypal soldier from the United States. He was not perfect, but he was a good, solid person. He had strong moral values. He actually loved and cared about his country. He fought willingly with the people near him. He was not a murderer. He shot and killed as was necessary. He wasn't taking great comfort or feeling important about himself because he was killing other human beings. He did his job to the best of his ability, and he lost his life. And as at the time, I think his troop commander, Captain Sardiano, very, very good man who subsequently retired as a full colonel, good man. He said, there is no victory without sacrifice. And Sergeant Muller paid the price for all of us. And that was about right.
Wow. Well, this is a total stark, when you hear those stories and the details and the human cost of war, it changes the whole paradigm. And it's important to make sure that people who have the decision-making power, which ultimately is the American people, should be very vigilant in how they send people off.
Well, we have to make sure it's for the right thing, and it's for something that's really vitally important to us. This is not a throwaway. Soldiers are not throwaways. They're living, breathing human beings. It takes time for them to grow up, to be educated by their families. They join the military. They serve in it to become competent. So if you're going to use that person within that formation, then make damn sure it's for the right purpose, for a good purpose. I remember after we came out of Vietnam, everybody said, no more Vietnams. But then I look at all these things that we've been involved in over the last 20 years. I would go back into the 90s where we intervened in Bosnia-Herzegovina and then subsequently in Kosovo. Did we really need to do those things? Was that really our affair? Was that a vital strategic interest that demanded, the use of American military power? And I'm not so sure. The other thing is there's a tendency to see war as a function of technology. Well, technology is very important. We were talking, I guess, yesterday about the fact that at the Battle of the Little Bighorn, the soldiers that Custer led had single-shot rifles. They'd have to pull back, cock, shoot, put in another billet, pull it back, cock, shoot. And the Indians had repeaters. And it made a difference. We had something similar to that happened in 1866 between the Austrians and the Prussians. So technology matters. But technology in and of itself is not a cure-all. It's not a substitute for human beings. Technology can augment, improve, extend human ability.
What was the technology factor in the battle? Can you tell the battle?
73 Easting.
Yeah. Did technology make the decisive?
I think, the technology was obviously very important, but it was also the people that used it. That's my point. If you look at the tanks that we had, we did not have automatic loaders. The tanks that were being utilized by the Iraqis were T-72s with automatic loaders. Well, we could fire 2 or 3 rounds from one of our tanks in the time that the automatic loader took to expel the shell and put another one in. So that makes a difference. We could fire on the move with great success because of the gyroscopic system in the sighting, so that whatever your tank did, however it moved left, right, up, and down, the gun would stay on the target that had been lased and given you the exact range and distance. And when you fired, it fired a projectile at 1 mile per second. That's pretty fast. And it would go, the penetrator on top of a sabot round would go for 18 miles before it finally lost all its energy and stopped. So in many cases, we were shooting right through Soviet export tanks that the Iraqis were using. And they did get some rounds off. And in the case I just told you, they had one that struck. They didn't have much success with the tanks because they also had to move the guns with human power, and we had an electric system that moved the gun instantly wherever the tank commander or the gunner wanted to point it. So in that sense, yes. But you don't get to fire 3 rounds in 9 or 10 seconds out of an M1 tank through that smoothbore cannon unless the loader, first of all, is built like Mike Tyson in most cases. And secondly, is very, very good at pulling something out, putting it in, and you've got somebody on the gun that quickly sights and a tank commander who immediately fires. But that has to be drilled because everybody has to be in the loop, because if you're in the wrong position inside that turret, the gun, as it comes back and recoils, will kill you. The turret itself, as it's moving, if you move your hand or your arm or your leg in something, it'll cut it off.
Yeah.
So this demands a lot of training, a lot of self-confidence, a lot of physical fitness, and it demands intelligence and good eyesight, good physical fitness. All of those things are combined, and then it becomes a routinized machine, a well-oiled machine, that wherever you send it, it does what it's supposed to do, and it does it brilliantly. That takes time. It takes time at sea. It takes time in the air. It doesn't matter where you go. So the forces that we field are good, or should be good, and they certainly were at that time.
Yeah.
But you don't want to use them in a cavalier manner or callously. Don't send people out and then lose large numbers for what is ostensibly no damn good reason.
Yeah. When you're in that tank and you're in that battle, I'm trying to think of things in my life. I've been in a car accident before, your heart's racing. But then I also think about a paramedic coming to visit someone who's been in a car accident. Between the person experiencing a car accident versus the paramedics, where his pace is, where his pulse is, that's just a civilian range. I'm thinking of adrenaline there in terms of something's happening that's life-threatening. What's that translator? Is there any way to describe what that's like for you when you're in the battle? Is it more relaxed? Is it like you've been in a car, just adrenaline fully surging?
Well, I think there's lots of adrenaline surging, but I think, again, it goes back to my earlier comment. You can't waste time worrying about whether or not you're going to be shot.
So you're disassociating about yourself.
You have to.
You're not really in touch with your personhood at that point. You
cannot.
You become one with the machine, so to speak,
as much as possible.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you're not a fool. You never lose sight of the reality that you're vulnerable.
Yeah.
And those are guardrails, mental guardrails. Well, if I do that, that's too risky. On the other hand, if I do this, I'm not going to probably won't be killed, but you still never know. You've got to suppress all that stuff. And that's important.
You just go with your intuition?
Well, it's not a question of intuition. I think it's all discipline is a form of habit.
Right, yeah.
Discipline is not because, I told you to do it, you bang on their heads. Everybody looks at basic training, parasites, they're disciplined now. You beat them up. No. Discipline is a form of habit. And if you listen to the drill instructors, what they're trying to impart to you is habit. You must always do these 5 things every time you pick up this weapon, every time you mount this vehicle. That's the point of routine. And your life depends upon the operation of that weapon system, the operation of that vehicle, the aircraft, that helicopter. Doesn't make any difference. All of that has to be ingrained over time, again and again. The unit that trains the most has the fewest accidents. The unit that trains the least has accidents.
Yeah.
The more you run something and become familiar with the equipment, and as you say, one with the equipment, the less likely you are to have these other problems that could cost you your life in battle. And it's a tough thing to do because how often are we thrown into that kind of battle? That was an unambiguous situation. This wasn't, I'm going to get into this Humvee and drive along this road and hope to God that the mine doesn't blow up under me.
You were ready for a fight.
Yeah, and that's terrible. Yeah. And I told someone in a very highly placed before I left the Army, I said, if you want to stop losing soldiers in these stupid Humvees that you cannot up armor, that will not survive these mines. And eventually they built mines that destroyed M1 tanks. That's how powerful they became. So the way you do it is that you send out an order that every general officer in the theater every 2 weeks will accompany a vehicular patrol without special security.
Yeah.
You go on the patrol,
just get in the game. Yeah.
And all of a sudden, I think those patrols would have ended because they were stupid. You send somebody out to be seen. Well, the British told us, don't do that. We found that the less they see you, the more they like you. The more they see you, the more they don't like you. So don't go out there and bother them. But we had everybody saying, no, we have to patrol. We have to patrol.
It's like a little microcosm of what we're doing on the global scale.
Yes, yes,
Always
absolutely.
looking for monsters.
And then the other thing is, what is this patrol going to do while it's out there other than signal everybody that they're there? And why are we going down these same roads? Forget it.
Yeah.
And you know, as soon as you move to the gate, there's an Arab terrorist or just an Arab fighter over there with a cell phone that says, here they come.
Yeah.
Oh, they're taking Route Bravo. See ya.
Yeah.
This is stupid.
Yeah.
And there's something else here that we need to keep in mind. This is word occupation. I remember listening to everybody saying, oh, we're going to be a huge success. We're going to transform Iraq into a liberal democracy. The first Arab liberal democracy that will be friendly to Israel. Yeah, well, whatever you're taking, continue to take it because that's never going to happen. So you might as well stay happy. Quaaludes, whatever you're taking, was insane. Had no chance of happening. Occupations turn soldiers into jailers, and it turns the people that live there into prisoners. No one wants to be policed by a foreigner.
Yeah.
You know, I kept trying to tell people before I left the Army, you know, I'm from North Philadelphia. If you sent the U.S. Army or the Marines into my neighborhood where I grew up, after 2 weeks, we'd probably shot at you.
Yeah.
Because we didn't want you around.
Yeah.
You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But there was no sense of that. And somebody actually said to me, well, we should have studied the Battle of Algiers. Well, they're still digging up thousands of dead Arabs in mass graves. They killed at least 20,000 people in Algiers. And what good did it do? Is Algiers now under French rule?
Yeah.
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
So these things we need to avoid. And we need to get rid of the people who are, especially civilians, who think that's a great idea, let's do it.
Yeah.
And then we need to get rid of these generals who will not stand up and say, wait a minute.
But Lindsey Graham said that it's a dead Russian's a good thing. And he said that we're there for the treasure. Don't we need those treasures over there in Ukraine?
No, we don't.
He said that's what we're over there. He just said that on Fox News.
It's another stupid remark that somehow or another we all sat around and said, we're going to fight this war and weaken the Russians so that we can control the resources that are allegedly in the Donbass. Listen, I'm sure there are some of those things there. There may not be as many. There's a lot of offshore oil in the Black Sea. But we didn't go in there with the United States Navy to conquer the Black Sea so that we could steal the oil. I think these are retrospective attempts to justify stupidity. You know, first of all, we don't live there.
Yeah.
It's not ours.
Yeah.
What are we doing there?
Well, if you're a nihilist, then you can do whatever you want.
Well, if you
Do
don't
it thou wilt. That is the whole of the law. Aleister
and
Crowley.
you have to remember that most of these people,
Or Crowleyans, yeah.
well, they take the view that all human life is fungible.
Yeah.
You and I are just clay that they can mold into whatever they like. I don't believe that. I don't believe that's true for the people in Iraq or Syria or Israel or Italy or anywhere else. Human beings have value. We may not like each other, but they all have value. And it's not our affair to go into someone else's country and decide who lives and who dies.
Yeah.
These things have to end.
Do you believe in the just war doctrine, St. Augustine?
Well, I think it's a good idea to review that before
Yeah.
you do anything.
Yeah.
And it's something we should go back to and consider it. The problem is I don't see anybody considering anything. There's no deliberation about anything because there are two ways to look at everything. First of all, Reinhold Niebuhr, you've heard of him.
Yeah.
Reinhold Niebuhr used to quote Abraham Lincoln, who roughly said, the challenge in American foreign policy is to link the contingencies of power with the principles of justice. In other words, his point was, if we're going to do something because we think it's important, that's one thing. We should also ask ourselves at the same time, is this morally justified? We don't ask either. We just have lobbies that tell us to go somewhere that beat our politicians to death with stacks of cash. And the politicians say, oh, sure, let's go to country X and do this.
Yeah.
Did anybody stand up and say, what are we doing in Libya?
Yeah.
And then, of course, we make stuff up. And what do you make stuff up? Oh, they have nuclear weapons. Oh, they have nerve gas. Oh, they have this.
Yeah. I think the universal principle and what you're echoing and what you're talking about is this universal moral principle of the human being, the human person. Because here's the thing: when you have things like Iran, you get these right-wing voters and Trump voters and Republican voters that still say, well, Iranians need to be destroyed. And if it means killing thousands or millions through sanctions or proxy wars, their lives don't matter as much as somebody else's life. And then the left says, well, hey, don't do Iran. The left is still ostensibly not big on Iran hawk talking points, although they're moving in that direction. But with the left, they turn around and say, yeah, we're not into the Iran story, but those Russians need to all be killed. So anything we can do to, perpetuate the grinding machine of the Ukraine war, let's do it. Well, and it's like, no, the human beings matter, whether they're Iranians, whether they're Russians, whether all of them. It has to be one principle.
Let me say this a minute. The narrative is based on the false assumption that if we don't do something, country X will destroy us or our alleged allies. So the argument with Iran is Iran wants to destroy Israel, therefore we must destroy Iran. Mm-hmm. Well, have the Iranians talked about that sort of thing? Sure, they have. So has everybody else in the Middle East. Don't show me any country in the Middle East where people have not said Israel should not be here, mm-hmm. and Israel should be removed. Ariel Sharon, and some people like him, some people don't. I liked him, at least insofar as the man was very blunt and straightforward. And when this statement was made that Israel should be eliminated or will eventually vanish, something like that from Khomeini, the original, Ariel Sharon laughed and he said, so what are we worried about? He said something out loud that everybody in the region agrees with. Okay, so it's a solution then, let's just nuke everyone. Because little Israel, with 7 million people, demands it. I mean, that's literally what it comes down to. I don't think that we, with military power alone, can make the world safe for Israel. There has to be a change in behavior and thinking that rewards some measure of diplomacy and compromise in some way. Right now, there is no willingness to compromise on anything in Israel. They see what they're doing as absolutely justified. They believe they have the moral high ground, and they're morally justified in murdering, killing the so-called Amalek, the subhumans that live on their borders and live around them. That's one position. Iran takes the position that it could live with Israel, and they have a president that has expressed that view, as some of his predecessors have, long after the Iranian Revolution. But it can't live as a vassal state of Israel. It cannot survive and be what it is as a vassal state of America. It's back to this earlier discussion that we had, that can America be a partner, or does America demand that if you partner with them, that you become a puppet or a vassal state? In other words, do we consult with the British, with the French, with the Germans, with anybody?
Yeah.
Or do we simply say, this is it, get on board or get out? I think we're on the get on board bit or get out. And I don't think that's the way to run the show. And I don't think it can run that way anymore, simply because we're not the only center of power. We're one of several centers.
Yeah.
And my great fear is we could face a nuclear confrontation because people finally say enough.
Yeah. Well,
that's the last thing we want.
Well, America can't co-sign to any foreign policy that starts with the principle that some people, because of their ethnicity, are subhuman. That can't happen.
No.
That's not America first. It will have no place in the future of America.
Yeah, of
That's
course
guaranteed.
not. Of course not. Yeah. And we should treat all states with dignity.
Mm-hmm.
Just as we think all human beings have dignity,
mm-hmm.
all work has dignity. We should take that into foreign relations, but we don't.
Yeah, well, that was fantastic. And I think it's important for us to continue to highlight with folks like yourself, people who've lived and had active combat, to tell the cost of war and the reality of war, so we don't see this as just another entertainment device. It's not. Human beings matter. They're real, just like you. and they're not figments on your screen. Even though I'm coming to you from a screen, this is not who I am. I am a human being. You're watching me on a screen, and we can't lose sight of that when it comes to war. I'm David Gornoski. Godspeed.